The drift trajectory was wrong. That was the first tell. A U.S. naval intelligence satellite analyst running a routine 48-hour track review on Baltic Sea shipping noticed it at 0630 hours. The vessel in question was the Pyotr Vinogradov, a Russian ocean-going tug logged in commercial databases as rendering assistance to the Kilo-class submarine Veliki Ustyug following a reported propulsion casualty. The Veliki Ustyug had been declared disabled 4 days earlier in a NavTex notice to mariners, a publicly transmitted navigational warning that Russian maritime authorities had broadcast on standard frequencies, establishing a legal paper trail for the tug's presence in the area. The drift analysis was what broke the cover story. Baltic Sea current patterns for that morning, cross-referenced against wind direction and observed surface wave vectors, indicated that a genuinely unpowered vessel under tow in that position would have been moving on a bearing approximately 15 degrees north of the Vinogradov's actual track. The deviation was small, not the kind of thing a casual observer monitoring AIS data would flag. But a vessel moving consistently against the predicted drift vector at a speed slightly too steady for passive towing conditions is not drifting, it is being steered. And the coordinates toward which it was being steered, with the slow precision of an object that needed to arrive at a specific point without drawing attention to the intentionality of its approach, sat directly above the primary fiber optic cable bundle running between Sweden's Gotland Island and the Estonian coast. That cable bundle carries a substantial portion of the Baltic states' internet traffic, financial system communications, and NATO logistics coordination data. Cutting it would not be an act of war in any formally declared sense. It would be a gray zone infrastructure attack, deniable, damaging, and enormously difficult to attribute with the legal certainty that an Article 5 invocation requires. The encoded priority message from the Office of Naval Intelligence reached Swedish Maritime Command at 0711 hours. The assessment was direct. The Vinogradov is not a tug. It is an electronic intelligence vessel operating under civilian cover, and the Kilo submarine it is towing is not disabled in any operationally relevant sense. Its sonar, signals intelligence suite, and underwater vehicle launch systems are fully functional. The approach vector is deliberate. The timing relative to Swedish coastal defense radar schedules suggests the operation was planned around a window when Swedish coverage would be at reduced density. The critical instruction embedded in the intelligence package was the one that ran counter to every instinct a coastal defense commander would have when a Russian submarine approached sensitive national infrastructure. Do not activate your fire control radar. Understanding why requires understanding what the Vinogradov actually was. The vessel carried beneath its weathered civilian paint scheme an electronic intelligence collection suite capable of recording radar emissions across a broad frequency range with enough fidelity to extract the operational parameters: frequency, pulse repetition interval, waveform characteristics, encryption timing sequences of any fire control radar that illuminated it. The suite required only a few dozen seconds of active emission to build a library entry comprehensive enough to allow that radar signals to be jammed, spoofed, or replicated in a future conflict. The Kilo's mission on the surface was to be the provocation that produced the radar emissions. A Kilo-class submarine approaching fiber optic cable infrastructure in Swedish territorial waters is precisely the kind of threat profile that demands a response. And in Sweden's defensive doctrine, the first response to a surface naval threat in a sensitive area is radar lock. Every second, Sweden's commanders held their fire control systems dark, while a Russian submarine closed on the cable was a second of operational discipline being bought at significant psychological cost. Sweden held, the Swedish Air Force launched 2 JAS-39E Gripen fighters from Ronneby at 0756 hours. The specific detail of how they flew the intercept is the part of this operation that most clearly illustrates the level of planning that went into the response. Both aircraft flew the entire intercept in emissions control, MCON Alpha, with their PS-05/AA-ESA radar systems in standby and all active electronic emissions suppressed. They used passive infrared sensors and visual acquisition to locate and track the Vinogradov and the Veliki Ustyug. They produced no radar emissions for the Vinogradov's collection suite to record. The Russian submarine's captain had been waiting for the radar alarm. The crew monitoring the Vinogradov's collection suite had been waiting for it. The operational plan depended on it. What the submarine's conning tower watch instead saw, without any prior warning from any electronic system aboard, was 2 Gripen fighters breaking out of low cloud cover at approximately 200 feet of altitude and crossing directly over the vessel at transonic speed. The aerodynamic shock signature of a fighter at 200 feet and near Mach airspeed is not subtle. The overpressure wave travels downward through water. A 3,000-ton submarine on the surface in calm conditions experiences a physical jolt from a supersonic overpressure at that range. The message was delivered in the only medium that couldn't be collected and analyzed by the Vinogradov's sensor suite: mechanical force and visual presence. We are here. We found you without your help. You have nothing from us. The Vinogradov's collection screens had recorded nothing useful. The entire first phase of the operation had produced zero intelligence product. A cornered intelligence operation does not gracefully acknowledge failure. It escalates to its backup objective. At 0831 hours, the Vinogradov's helmsman applied power and executed a course alteration that placed the tow line across the bow of the Finnish-flagged cargo vessel MV Kotka Star, which was transiting the area on a standard commercial routing. The near collision forced the Kotka Star's master to take emergency-avoiding action, producing a chaotic few minutes of radio traffic, engine noise, and visual confusion across a half-mile radius of Baltic Sea. It was theater, maritime noise designed to provide cover for the actual next action. The Veliki Ustiug's rear UUV hatch began to open. Swedish Maritime Surveillance Center's underwater monitoring network, a network of bottom-mounted acoustic sensors seeded along the approaches to critical cable infrastructure that Russia's planners had apparently not fully mapped, detected the hatch mechanism at 0833. The contact report reached Swedish Naval Command in Karlskrona and was relayed immediately to the two Swedish Navy Visby-class corvettes that had been holding position in a fog bank 8 nautical miles north of the operation since 0745. The Visby-class is built on a carbon composite hull with angular fasting geometry that produces a radar cross-section in the single-digit square meter range, comparable to a small fishing vessel on most naval radar displays. The two corvettes, HSW MS Karlstad and HSW MS Sundsvall, ran at 35 knots through the remaining distance. They appeared out of the morning fog at approximately 400 meters from the Vinogradov's port side without having registered as coherent contacts on the Russian vessel's navigation radar at any point during their approach. The Russian crew saw them with their eyes before they appeared on any screen. Both corvettes activated their electronic warfare systems in a focused directional mode. Not broadband jamming, but a targeted emission aimed at the specific frequency band the Veliki Ustiug's UUV control system was known to use, based on technical intelligence derived from a prior recovery of a similar Russian UUV system in Norwegian waters 18 months earlier. The control link between the submarine and its underwater vehicle severed cleanly. The UUV's onboard autonomous programming, lacking a valid mission waypoint update, defaulted to a hold position command. The hatch had opened. The vehicle had not launched. The Swedish commander's voice on the international VHF channel was level and precise. He identified both vessels by hull number, cited the specific maritime regulations being violated, stated the restricted zone boundaries the Vinogradov was approaching, and directed a course change to 270 degrees, due west back toward international waters with a time limit for compliance. There was a pause of approximately 40 seconds. The Veliki Ustiug's captain had done the geometry himself. Two Visby corvettes at 400 meters are within the minimum arming range for a torpedo launch from a surfaced submarine. A weapon fired at that distance would not have traveled far enough for its safety interlock to release before it reached its target. The Visby's 57mm Bofors gun can fire 220 rounds per minute and penetrate a kilo-class pressure hull at close range. The Gripen fighters that had overflown the vessel an hour earlier were still in the operational area, confirmed by the passive acoustic detection of their engines at altitude. The Vinogradov sounded its horn. Black exhaust rose from its funnel as the engines engaged. The tow line came taut and the Veliki Ustiug began to move. West, away from the cable coordinates, toward international waters. No weapon had been fired, no radar had been illuminated. Not a single frequency the Russian collection suite could record had been emitted by any Swedish defense asset throughout the entire engagement. The operational accounting is worth examining precisely because it cuts more sharply than a simple victory narrative. Russia committed a $400 million Kilo-class submarine, an intelligence vessel with specialized collection equipment, UUV hardware, and the operational security of its tugboat cover methodology to this operation. It returned with none of its objectives achieved. No radar frequency intelligence, no cable infrastructure damage, no UUV data collection, and, most damaging for future operations, the knowledge that NATO had identified and successfully countered the specific tug and disabled submarine cover story. That methodology is now burned for the Baltic theater. Sweden and the United States spent satellite analyst time, fighter flight hours, and the electromagnetic energy from a directional jamming burst. The return on that expenditure included confirmation of the UUV control frequency used by this specific Russian system, technical documentation of the Vinogradov's collection suite operating behavior, and a demonstration of the Visby-class's practical radar stealth performance against an adversary attempting active radar surveillance of the engagement area. The intelligence product flowed in one direction. The deeper lesson this operation illustrates is not primarily about any specific platform or system. It is about the relationship between discipline and technological advantage. Sweden's fire control radar advantage over the Vinogradov's jamming capability was only maintained because Swedish commanders held the impulse to use it. The Gripen intercept was effective because the pilots suppressed the instinct to illuminate the target with their own sensors. The Visby corvette's stealth approach worked because both ships maintained MCON during the transit. Every element of the response depended on someone choosing not to do the thing their training had conditioned them to do reflexively. That kind of operational discipline, knowing which tools to leave holstered and when, is significantly harder to train than proficiency with the tools themselves. It requires commanders to trust that their restraint in one domain will be covered by capability in another, and it requires the intelligence architecture to be good enough that the decision to stay silent is based on reliable information rather than hope. The Baltic Sea cable infrastructure is intact. The Veliki Ustjug's UUV is still aboard, its mission unexecuted. The Vinogradov's collection suite has nothing useful in its buffer. Here's the question this operation leaves genuinely open for anyone thinking about the next iteration. The Swedish response worked in part because the technical intelligence on the UUV control frequency, derived from the Norwegian recovery 18 months earlier, was current and accurate. Russian UUV control systems will be redesigned with this incident as a reference point. The directional jamming technique that severed the control link depends on knowing what frequency to target before the operation begins. How does NATO maintain the technical currency of that kind of adversary system intelligence against a program that is actively modifying its frequencies and protocols in response to known NATO collection events? And what is the backup capability if the control frequency intelligence is stale when the next hatch opens? Leave your assessment below.